Hi, and very welcome to this fireside chat with one of Sweden's most important innovation leaders. My name is Regina Summer, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for International Collaboration at Vinnova, the Swedish innovation agency. I'm here in our studio in Stockholm with Vinnovas Director General Darja Isaksson. Very welcome, Darja.
Thank you. Great to be here.
You are a very inspiring leader, and I have always been super impressed by your knowledge and also the courage that you have. And I'm pretty sure that many of us in Sweden are. How did you become the General Director of Vinnova?
Well, I mean, that's basically a question you should ask government, because they're the one the Swedish government decided. But from my perspective, it was in a way sort of a coincidence. I found myself reading the ad when this job was open to apply for. And to be honest, I read it thinking that I would just, nudge some good friends to apply. And when reading it, because I've always been working in the private sector, I was like, this sounds really interesting. And I ended up applying for myself. And after that, it was a long process, the regular interviews and tests, etc. So I applied in December 2017, and somewhere around May, I was told that I was offered this job, and I was really, really happy about that, of course.
And we are very happy about that, of course, at Vinnova. But that's quite a long process, isn't it? Or is that the normal process when you apply for this?
I have only applied for this type of job once, so I can't say.
So it's your own purpose. But what's your background?
Well, I'm an engineer by training, and I would say by, the way I was raised. I sometimes said on stage that I was raised in what you would call a kind of a 90s makerspace. My father was working in research, R&D in the telecom industry, and he was also doing a lot of his own innovation work at home. So I was just expected to experiment with electronics and programming pretty early on. In my professional career, I fairly early started as an entrepreneur. I founded all three companies. I led two as CEO for almost a decade. And in those companies, I was always working in the space of, where digital meets product. So it was basically product innovation in various industries. So you could think about, anything from connected lawnmowers to connected garbage bins to control room systems and the like. And in this type of work, drawing on new knowledge from academia was always key. Another very important thing was working with a people-centric approach, using strategic design tools, both for strategy and exploring what was possible and bringing it forward. And then during the decade or so that I was doing this work, however, a lot of the systems perspective became more and more apparent and more important for me personally. So once I had the kind of opportunity to decide what I would do with my own time, I had noticed, the ability of regulatory frameworks to really hinder or drive the innovations that we needed. It was very clear the necessity and the need for the public sector to work really closely with both academia and industry and companies alike to experiment, to learn what was possible, to really drive forward. And then this need to, and that was also growing frustration, the need to focus on what really makes a difference in terms of, and the more knowledge that I gain in terms of sustainability, not tech fixes, but what is really needed to drive transformative change. And this was a course over many years, that meant that I shifted also my focus, engaged more in, for instance, boards of research institutes as well as research programs. I was very, very honored as well when I was invited by the Prime Minister to join his Innovation Council, that I was part of between 2015 and 2018. So all of this journey was kind of coming back to what led to me reading this ad and thinking, I just might apply. It sounds like a dream job.
And you got the job, and we're happy for that. But Vinnova is the Swedish innovation agency in one of the top innovative countries in the world. No pressure. But what was going on through your head the first months when you started as a general director at Vinnova in August 2018?
I mean, apart from hooray, I'm really looking forward to work with this team. I mean, basically, I had experience of working with Vinnova. I knew some people in that organization, and I could not wait to get the chance to, really work with the team that I had been given. So that was obviously part of what was on my mind. But the other part was what is now key in our mission. And I remember that the first questions that I asked my organization was, okay, so tell me, how connected are we to the very front line of research in terms of what does it take to drive this necessary transformation? And how connected are we in terms of the international research and best practices in terms of how to also make the public sector play its part? Because as we heard previously today, the supply side of innovation is just not enough. You also need policy that create incentives to invest in the solutions we need. We need policy that help drive demand for what is needed. Public sector has such an important role to play. And in those, in that kind of, how should I call it? In those interactions between these different parts of the systems, the ability also to in there implement lessons learned from innovation work in terms of experimentation, and we heard, regulatory sandboxes, etc., was important. So I guess I would say that primarily on my mind, hooray for the team. Now we can make an even bigger difference. Where are the key levers to kind of push? And then, how could we do that? So the result being both now that we're well on our way, developing the ways that we're working, making sure that our organization and all the stakeholders out there know that our mission is to open up for the innovations that make an impact in terms of the transformation to sustainable society. Their innovation in our point in time is not neutral. Experiments are needed. There will be failures. We need to learn from them as fast as we can, but yeah.
And you kind of answering my next question in a sense there, but what is Vinnova's role in the Swedish innovation ecosystem? And you are pinpointing that, these soft parts, but we are a government agency. Yeah. There are some rules, there are some, frames that we work within.
Yeah.
But what is our role in this?
I mean, formally, the way that the government formulates it is that we're tasked with funding research and innovation and developing strong innovation ecosystems. And that's our mandate. And obviously there are rules on, and laws to be obliged. But another way to put it is that in doing this work, we are both tasked with, together, of course, with the stakeholders, identifying needs and gaps in terms of where do we need more research, or where are the innovation gaps, or what kind of collaboration could make a difference. We are privileged with the opportunity to actually play an active role also in helping others, but also promoting ourselves a mobilization towards, important societal outcomes. And I can come back to that. And we then fund not only research and innovation, but sometimes even more importantly, the supporting structures that lower threshold, be it access to research infrastructure, access to important networks, access to open test beds and innovation environments where you can try out your new idea, you get access to your first customer or to knowledge that you need or partnerships. And we are tasked also with, of course, connecting this to the EU framework, Horizon Europe. But also, and you know this very well, but we have an extensive collaboration with many countries outside of Europe as well, since the Swedish government has international partnerships with a number of countries. So in that sense, we also work very closely both to other Swedish government agencies. We've seen the Energy Agency here today, for instance, which is a great collaboration, but also our sister agencies in other parts of the world. And always with a focus of creating opportunities for those who can make a difference to find each other and dare to experiment and collaborate and have opportunities together.
To help the innovation system to flourish and creating that platform. Yes, that's great. In Vinnova's business plan for 2020, you focused on mobilizing towards system innovation. And we have been talking during the day about system innovation, but what would you say the difference between innovation system and system innovation? And I know this is a question that we, it might sound quite obvious, but I don't think it's very obvious for everyone.
It's not obvious for everyone, and it could sound like sometimes you say the word in the reverse order. What's up with that?
Why did you change it?
No, well, we didn't. These are both actually concepts that come from academia. But an innovation system is the sum of the actors that contribute to innovation. So you could think of it in terms of stakeholders, academia, industry, startups, ecosystems, various other institutions, public sector, civil society. Actually, I would like to remind even citizens are, actively participating and impacting how we work with innovation on a society level. So that's innovation systems. And then, of course, you can look at different innovation systems if you look into from different angles. System innovation, on the other hand, that's a concept for not just saying it the other way around, but rather system innovation is defined as the transition from one socio-technological system to another. So it's best to think about it in terms of examples. So when the world moved from horse and carriages to cars, it had a massive impact on society, right? How we build our cities, how we live, how we can run our businesses, because it completely changed how we can travel and interact and work together and information, etc. Other even bigger changes were the first agricultural revolution. When we talk about sustainability now, we're always often reminding ourselves of the first industrial revolution. It had such a profound impact on all of society. It completely changed, how education works, how business works, etc. There were many, many things that were impacted. So what we know that we need now is system innovation. We need to have a transformation of society with a similar profoundness in its impact on how we live, on how we work, on how we organize our society. These are still early days in a way, but the importance is the other system innovation transitions took much longer. We cannot afford it to happen. It needs to be faster this time. And that's why it's so important for all of us to be as deliberate and as knowledgeable as possible in what kind of work practices we actually implement in order to drive that.
Interesting. Well, in 2021, so last year, the business plan prioritized to establish new ways of working. And during the last year, we have reorganized ourselves at Vinnova and identified 10 thematic areas to build teams on. Which are these thematic areas?
Well, you can think about them in two groups. So 5 of them are addressing societal challenges. So those are sustainable industries, sustainable food and mobility systems, sustainable cities and societies, you could think, and let's see, did I forget one? And sustainable precision health, which is also absolutely key for social sustainability. And I'd like to highlight that we know that the life science sector also has a major carbon footprint impact. So all of these are important. And then we have 5 other prioritized areas addressing important capabilities needed to drive this. So those are digitalization and the key technologies that drive it, strong startup ecosystems, or the connection between these ecosystems also to industry, competence and lifelong learning, which we know will be key to be able to change as fast as we need, and innovative public sector and civil society, because they're also key stakeholders and they need to update their ways of working and be deeply active in innovation even more. And then future capabilities, both in terms of resources needed to drive competencies and innovation in relation to emerging technologies, but also, and we heard this before from IIPP, I think, the importance of working with anticipatory design, anticipatory innovation, and those type of methodologies, both at Vinnova and also in the ecosystem as a whole.
And what are these new ways of working that is also in the business plan for last year?
Yeah, I could first say what is not changing. As you mentioned, we have our mandate. There are also laws and regulations that regulate how we work, as well as best practices. So in terms of state aid rules, etc., there are still limits to how we can work. But naturally, we're also building on experiences. So for instance, we have, for a decade now soon, funded strategic innovation programs together with 2 other government agencies, and we have a lot of lessons learned there, and it's been a tremendous success, both in terms of driving technology transfer, strategic competencies, but more importantly, bringing in more SMEs and other types of stakeholders in the innovation ecosystem. So there's a lot of things that we're building on from there. We've also for a long time had the challenge-driven innovation program where different actors have mobilized around challenges. So we are taking natural, from my perspective, and I think most of Vinnovas' perspective, we're taking some pretty natural next steps based on both our own experiences and the stuff that we're continuously learning when we work together with other government agencies in the world. But having said that, I would say that there are a number of significant changes. One is that we're quite aware and transparent about the fact that we are also actors in the system. I mean, we may be a government agency. Everything we do, every call that we launch, every activity we have has an impact on the system. So we are developing our strategic tools and work practices to be both transparent and even more deliberate in the design of that. And I think the missions process work that we've been doing is one great example where we are actively engaging with other stakeholders in the system to mobilize, and we're part of that process. And making use then of our unique position. The other part then, so a more deliberate stance in our strategy and our engagement with other actors. And the other, I would say, important change is that we are taking an active portfolio approach. That's also something we heard from IIPP earlier today, the importance of making sure that we are addressing not only supply side, not only the strategic research and the supply side part of innovation, but also the demand side, and that we are building our ability to have this kind of portfolio. And then we, dare I say, we try to do that, and this is hard, not only from a Vinnova perspective. I mean, we are really there to drive a transformation, not even only in Sweden. And to do that means that we need to have a lot of interaction with sister agencies and actors in Sweden and in the world. So a lot of this work we're also developing together with others.
And we have now been in a pandemic for almost 2 years. And Vinnovas focus for 2022 this year is to accelerate the transformation in our society. How can a government agency contribute to such a transition to achieve the global goals?
Yeah, so I mean, there are many different government agencies. I think I've said quite a few things now about the innovation, the role of Vinnova. But government agencies in general are also absolutely critical in creating framework conditions to drive this transformation. So, for instance, setting policy that creates incentives to invest in the future. So, the price on carbon dioxide, for instance, actively makes a difference on whether it's more profitable to keep just producing new plastics, or whether it's more profitable to actually make the investments necessary to have a circular flow of materials, plastics being one part. So that's one example. So the policy frameworks are really important. Then I think anybody who ever worked with innovation is well aware that regulation is sometimes in the way. So sometimes you just want to remove it in a way. So to what extent public sector and government agencies are capable of making sure that they set the regulations that open up for the innovations, not only the incentives, but open up the opportunities for the innovation needed. And we have seen some great examples from Swedish agencies changing regulations to enable, for instance, innovations in food, in sea-based food but made on land is one example, or regulate. And now we're seeing challenges in terms of regulation in both on the EU and national level connected to circular flows of materials, because the regulation in large is aiming at reducing waste. But when you want a circular flow, you have to have a different kind of paradigm. And there are many, many other examples. So, and then comes the ability then of those setting and creating these regulations to do two things. One is to see the entire perspective from the local to the national to the international, because when it's at its worst, different sets of regulation actually work against each other and goals as well. So that's one perspective. The other one is having the ability to work in terms of experimenting, also with regulation. I think policy labs in Sweden, regulatory sandboxes in Europe are great examples of what can be actually common frameworks of how to do this. You set a risk-managed experiment and you learn as fast as possible what qualities in the regulation that is needed. So all of this. And then I would say we heard also, and if I could say one more thing today previously, about the need to start redefining value in terms of driving investments. So here's another example I would like to highlight. When, for instance, municipalities, government agencies and alike start working with, for instance, social impact bonds, defining a societal outcome and a common good, and redefining kind of the business models with the stakeholders needed to drive that value, that's some really interesting work that I think we will hopefully see much more of.
And it's quite cool that how, I must say, how Vinnova as a government agency has really, taking the role as an innovation leader. And you were mentioning the policy labs, where we have invited, municipalities and other government organizations and public organizations to learn, how can you also do this? And we, I really like that with Vinnova. It's quite cool. But yes, not to forget about the policy and regulation level in all this innovation.
And can I just say, and I mean, in doing this, of course, we're also part of an international movement. So we are just one government agencies, and people in our organizations are since years, connected, learning from people in Singapore, France, UK, and other parts of the world. So obviously we are also drawing a lot on experience from others in doing this. And I'm really happy to see in terms of this in relation to policy labs and anticipatory regulation as well, etc., that the Swedish government is really listening, and we have seen some interesting initiatives and examples of things that have been happening in just the last couple of years that I think that we will be very proud of in the future.
You started mentioning it just now. How can Sweden contribute to the necessary transformation internationally?
Well, in many ways, and I mentioned some, but first of all, just coming back to Sweden Innovation Days, I think that we just need to be part of all the innovators in the world that willingly share experiences of both, the unexpected failures and the successes, because as we heard Dan say before, we need to be so much faster at learning from each other and applying what works. But then in terms of Sweden, again, coming back to, we are a highly innovative country. We have high levels of trust. We really have the capacity also to bring in others and nurture this culture of collaboration in every partnership that we have, and I would like to think we do. But the biggest impact that we have, of course, is through the difference that innovative companies in Sweden have in the world. So when we see our multinationals really drive transformation, when we see them work together with the sharpest startups in the world, not only from Sweden, of course, I think in the end that's where the biggest impact that we will be. And then also reminding ourselves, of course, we are, as everyone else, part of an international research community, and I think we're all proud of the work that Stockholm Resilience Center and then Johan Rockström, now working from Germany, has given us, for instance. So
definitely. And you were mentioning, of course, the corporates, and in Sweden, I think we have great examples of corporates that are, competitive firms on all levels. But when it comes to, the global goals, they have the same goals, and they collaborate in so many projects that we have seen. I think that's quite impressive.
They even collaborate with their own competitors. Yeah. And I think that's a testimony to the mindset, because they're working with scientific targets in mind, driving this, and then they see the value of working even together with competitors in early stage, just to actually help drive the change. So yes, it's encouraging to see.
Yes, definitely. But okay, you have been the Director General for Vinnova for 3.5 years. And have you had any challenges that has kept you awake at night during these 3.5 years?
No, if I don't sleep well, I usually blame my kids.
We all do.
But other than that, I typically sleep pretty well. But I think as any leader, it's like continuous internal dialogue. Are the priorities that I make for myself, for my team, for our organization, are they the right ones? Because you continuously have to look at that. Are we learning enough as we go? Are we humble enough to adjust, pivot, change when we learn that this wasn't really the way to go? We have to change. So yeah, from various perspectives, obviously that's something I ask myself on a regular basis. Okay,
so you sleep like a baby if the kids haven't bothered you in any way.
But okay. I do think about the priorities a lot. Yeah,
I understand. Is there something that you're especially proud of?
Yeah, well, I am immensely proud of a lot of things. I mean, of course, I'm obviously proud to be allowed to be one of the representatives of the Swedish innovation ecosystem. I think it's a fantastic country to work with innovation and to be part of the world in that sense. One thing that I'm proud of right now, and you've seen so many examples of this, is that we're not alone, but we're definitely an organization that managed to, during this pandemic, use it as an opportunity to evolve also ourselves, the way we work, the way we interact with others, and at the same time still making sure that we continue to support all the actors in the system with everything that's still absolutely necessary. But I'm incredibly proud of the Vinnova team that was capable of doing that, and I'm really humbled also by the response, because I feel that we have our sister agencies, we have actors. We are not alone in doing this, and I think that's why we actually managed to do it, that we have such fantastic support from everybody that we're working with.
Thank you so much, Darja, for sharing your thoughts and ideas here at this fireside chat. And we thank you guys for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you.